generals with stars on their shoulder who are cowards, who ultimately wouldn't stand up to the ideologies being rammed down the throats of our leadership. They never stood up and said, nope, hey, women in combat's not going to work very well. They're not going to stand up and say, we're not going to do this trans stuff. They didn't stand up and say, hey, we don't need your CRT and DEI. It causes division inside our ranks. It only creates skepticism and animosity. And no one ever threw their stars on the table, said we're not doing it. It's how the military allowed itself to go woke. You're right, because there were cowards in camouflage who wouldn't make tough calls or retire or call it out or resign and say, I'm not doing this.
Yeah, it's really important we get that guy in there. Joining me now, my friend Sean Parnell, host of Battleground Live, combat veteran himself. Sean, you got to see it from an officer's window, although you were one of the good ones actually on the ground fighting with your men. How bad the rot actually got is bad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's real bad. And, in fairness, you're right. I mean, officers have, and I've experienced this as well. There are too many leaders in the military, both at the tactical level, all the way up to the strategic level, from lieutenant all the way up to general. There are too many officers in the United States military who are only concerned with their bow and never their weight. In other words, it's the people that are the ladder climbers who never actually are boots on the ground, front towards enemy, that end up ascending the ranks into these huge influential positions that make decisions about all the door kickers and warfighters below. So it's a huge problem. And it's part of the reason why the Department of Defense and the Pentagon and every service branch is in the situation that they're in right now. And, really, Jesse, it's about leaders who don't have the backbone to stand up for their troops and ultimately what's right. And that's precisely why confirming a guy like Pete Hegseth is just so important, because he would be a Secretary of Defense who actually served front towards enemy in Iraq and Afghanistan as part of these wars and knows what it's like to be shot at.
Yeah, he does know what it's like to be shot at. And Sean, can you explain why you could, because not all these flag officers are lifelong pogues and dorks. A lot of these guys were, in their younger years, were door kickers themselves. But then, is it just the swamp, Sean? Is it just you get to DC and you get those birds on there, there's a couple stars on there, and you just forget all about the guys you used to fight with and fight for?
Well, I have a theory about this. I think that many people, I don't know about you, but I went into the military after 9/11. I don't come from a long history of military generals or non-commissioned officers in my family. My intention was to join for a career, retire as a lieutenant colonel or full colonel someday. I got to combat, and I realized real quickly that was probably not going to be the case. Combat sucks pretty badly, that my 9 lives were up. And so, I was medically retired. So in many ways that decision was taken from me, but I was getting out either way. But my point is this, there's something about combat that kind of makes you, I don't know, it kind of makes you understand life in a little bit of a deeper way. When life and death is on the line every single day, how fragile it can be. And so many people who've experienced the horrors of war, Jesse, tend to make their way out of the military. The tragic irony of that is that's precisely the type of people that we need in charge. By contrast, the people who often, go to combat, like you said, pogues or staff officers, while they're necessary in many ways to support the door kickers and the war fighters, it's often those people who don't experience the horrors of war up front and up close and personal who end up staying in and ascending to these positions where they've never actually had a bullet cracked by their head. So I think, I liken it to, being an artist or being a painter, but never having painted a painting. If you've never done that, can you really call yourself a painter? Likewise, you get these generals who are commanding combat troops who say that they were in combat because they served in a support area in Bagram, but have never actually been in the trenches front towards enemy. I mean, I think it's a huge problem, Jesse. And again, why are we even having this conversation in the first place? Is because a guy like Pete Hegseth, who's an actual door kicker, he's an infantry officer, Jesse. He's been in these wars. He's seen the horrors of war up close and personal. And not only that, he's seen how terrible it is for people who come home. And I think, that's the reason why people like us support his confirmation. But I think it's also the reason why there's tremendous resistance inside the Beltway for a guy like this, because normally those positions are reserved for the experienced people, those flag officers that you just talked about. And oh, by the way, it's those very same flag officers that bumbled us into Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. So believe me when I tell you, I'm completely open and actually hopefully Pete gets confirmed, because he's the guy for the job for sure.
Sean, I talk a lot about this poisonous little circle there. Not just the flag officers, they're an important part of it, but the politicians in the defense industry. Now, obviously, a nation needs some kind of a defense industry, but it should not lead the nation, and it most definitely should not have any say whatsoever in the foreign policy of a nation. But it's very clear, Sean, ours does.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it, especially when you have generals within the Pentagon, these flag officers who are in charge of acquisitions that grant these lucrative contracts to many of these defense contractors like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, to name a few, these very lucrative Pentagon defense contracts. And then those very same generals find themselves on the board to the tune of $500,000 a year when they get out of the military, raking in the cash. That's a very real problem. And what you get, Jesse, when that dynamic is in play is one big corrupt self-licking ice cream cone where we profit off of war. Well, I mean, and you're seeing that in Ukraine. I mean, all of these defense contractors are happy as hell that we're at war in Ukraine right now, that they can make munitions and churn them out and give them to Ukraine and make more munitions. I mean, their stocks are through the roof. Well, President Trump comes along and chooses somebody like Pete Hegseth and says, actually, under my tenure, under my presidency, no more flag officers can serve on the board of any of these defense contractors. And Pete Hegseth, I want you to actually ensure that the Pentagon passes an audit for the first time in 7 years. I really want you to reform the organization. That's precisely why you see the resistance to a guy like Pete Hegseth. That's precisely why you see the gross, disgusting character assassination of Pete Hegseth, because reformers, Jesse, as you know, are not often appreciated in their time. And as bureaucracies grow, they get more and more powerful. They get less transparent. And their first instinct when a reformer comes along is to protect themselves. And that's exactly what you're seeing the Pentagon and all these defense contractors and all these lobbying firms do against Pete Hegseth, because for them, the status quo means dollars and cents. It means a ton of profit. Pete represents a drastic change to that, and of course, they're resistant to it.
Sean, where's the money go? You brought up a great point about 7 straight failed audits, which is absolutely staggering. 7 straight failed audits. Sean, the money didn't disappear into the ether. Where did it go?
Into the pockets of these defense contractors, Jesse. And I'll tell you where it doesn't go. It sure as hell doesn't go to making the life of the warfighter better. Anytime there's anything cut from the Pentagon whatsoever, Jesse, it's always cut on, it's balanced on the backs of our nation's warfighters. We're always cutting their pay. We're always cutting their per diem, but while simultaneously putting them in more and more dangerous places. That needs to stop, right? But it is the generals, and it is the politicians, and it is the defense contractors, and it is the lobbyists. Those are the people who are laughing all the way to the bank. And again, it's these people that are simultaneously afraid of a Trump presidency and a Pete Hegseth Secretary of Defense, because they know that those two people represent drastic change to the status quo, and they don't like that because it affects their bottom line.
Sean, is he going to get through? I got to tell you, man, he's, for me, maybe the most important one, and that tells me he has the smallest chance to get through. But I'm a cynic by nature. Is he getting through?
Yeah, listen, Jesse, I've known Pete for a very long time. I worked with Pete at Concerned Veterans for America before he was Pete Hegseth on Fox News. Yes, I'm calling it right here. I think he's going to get through. That does not mean that the personal attacks are going to relent. In fact, I think you're going to see a slow drip, drip, drip against Pete Hegseth from now until his confirmation hearing. That's why it's critically important for veterans, for warfighters, for conservatives, for Republican senators to understand the moment that we're in, to understand exactly why this man is being attacked. And by the way, these attacks, this type of character assassination, Pete's a big boy. He can handle himself, but it affects his family. It sure as hell affects his children. That's why we have to rally around him to make sure that he doesn't have to go through this alone. The attacks on him, I can tell you, I know this man. I've known him for a long time. They are completely bogus. Like, there's no truth to them. They are fabricated out of whole cloth. And so Republican senators, I mean, you know the motivation behind this, Jesse. They're going after this man's character in the hope that a couple of Republican senators might not vote for him and then tank his nomination. As Republicans, for the love of God, we cannot allow that to happen. I mean, how many freaking Biden nominations got tanked during the Biden presidency? Those people did far more damage to this country than any Trump nomination will ever do in 3.5 short years. So there's not a single damn Republican out there that should be voting against Pete Hegseth or anybody else. We should not play the rules. We should not play the game according to the rules that the Democrats set. Republicans need to saddle up and vote for Pete Hegseth because this guy is the answer to a lot of the Pentagon's problems.
John, you are the man. Thank you, my brother. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.